Fu Xinqing nodded slowly, then signaled for Jiang to enter the room. He instructed, fetch some white paper and a fingerprinting pad. Jiang was taken aback by the request but followed the order without questioning. He quickly retrieved the items Fu Xinqing had asked for. In the room, Fu Xinqing remained silent as he carefully pressed his 10 fingerprints, one by one, onto the white paper. Once he was done, he handed the paper to Chen Hegua, who still seemed bewildered. Chen Hegua hesitated for a moment before cautiously asking, "Are you really giving this to me?" Fu Xinqing's lips curled into a faint, bitter smile. He replied, "Yes, but please return it to me when you're finished." To be honest, if she's willing to ask me directly, I'd give it to her without hesitation. He wiped the red ink from his fingertips with a damp towel, then raised his head and instructed Jiang, who was waiting at the door, to escort Chen Hegua back. He added, "In the future, avoid coming to places like this. If I find myself in trouble again, I might not be able to help." Chen Hegua understood that his intentions were well-meaning. She softly murmured a, "Thank you," and left the room with Jiang by her side. Alone in the room, Fu Xinqing was soon approached by Xiao Wu, who looked puzzled. "Brother Xing, how did you handle that young lady?" Bareheaded followed closely, rubbing his numbed half-face and grumbling, "That girl sure packs a punch. My face still stings. Brother Xing, you owe me one for getting slapped every time I pick up your girls. I'm already bald." Before he could finish his complaint, Little Five playfully smacked Bareheaded's bald head again and teased, "Get lost. Who told you to have such an ugly face? Go blame your parents at home." Fu Xinqing tugged at the corner of his lips and said, "Baldy, go with Little Five to Sister Hua and choose your favorite girl. I'll cover the expenses under my name." Bald-headed cheered up instantly at the prospect and eagerly agreed. Little Five looked at Fu Xinqing and asked with a grin, "Should I call the other brothers over?" Fu Xinqing shook his head. "No need, let them enjoy themselves." He then rose from his seat and called He Yan. "Have you left yet?" he inquired. He Yan's voice came through the phone, "No, we just finished dinner and we're about to head back." After obtaining her address, Fu Xinqing calmly stated, "Wait for me there, I'll pick you up." He Yan sounded puzzled, "There's no need, it's easy to find a taxi here. You can head back directly." "I'll take a taxi." Ignoring her protests, Fu Xinqing simply stated, "Wait for me," and ended the call. He Yan put away her mobile phone and turned to see Su Chenhua looking worried. She walked over and said, "You can go back. Someone is coming to pick me up." Su Chenhua was taken aback and asked, "Is it someone from Fu Xinqing's side?" In response to his question, He Yan confirmed, "Yes, but there's no need to worry. Everything has been resolved since the last incident." Su Chenhua contemplated for a moment and then asked, "Miss He, is there really no use in reporting the case?" He Yan chuckled and reassured him, "There are many complexities involved, and reporting the case would only bring me more trouble. Don't worry, I'll be fine." A while later, Fu Xinqing arrived and lowered the car window. He cast a cold glance at He Yan and Su Chenhua, then said to He Yan, "Get in." He Yan waved to Su Chenhua and bid him farewell. She then opened the car door and got inside. As soon as she sat down, Fu Xinqing suddenly lunged at her from the driver's seat. With one hand around her neck and the other gripping her jaw, he forcefully turned her head, lowered her lips, and gave her a harsh, almost vengeful kiss. The sudden and aggressive kiss took Yan by surprise, causing her to instinctively struggle. Outside the car, Su Chenhua, who had recovered from his initial shock, was both angry and alarmed. He rushed to the car and tried to open Yan's door, but it was locked. He extended his arm through the partially lowered window, attempting to unlock the door. He yelled in anger, "Let her go, you brute." Fu Xinqing released her. He Yan glanced at Su Chenhua, still sitting in the car. One look from him, and the car not only stopped but also accelerated onto the main road. Su Chenhua's arm was trapped in the window as the car sped away, causing him to stumble and fall to the ground. He Yan turned to see Su Chenhua lying on the ground, unsure of his condition. She urgently called out to Fu Xinqing, "Stop. Stop, Fu Xinqing, what are you doing?" Fu Xinqing, however, ignored her protests and continued driving. He Yan is surprised and angry, but she can't go and grab the steering wheel with him. She finds her mobile phone from her purse and calls Su Chenhua. Fortunately, when the phone rang, Su Chenhua picked it up. Without waiting for He Yan to open his mouth, he anxiously asked her, "Miss He Yan, are you okay?" Hearing his voice, He Yan, that heart this just slightly put down, asked him away, "Did you hurt?" I'm fine. Su Chinhua said that his breath was obviously short, and his mood was extremely unstable. Miss Yen, don't be afraid. I'll report to the police immediately. He Yen hurriedly said, don't worry, I'm okay. You don't have to report to the police. It's okay, there may be some misunderstanding just now. So, you go back to the school park and I'll call you back later, okay? Su Chinhua had no choice but to answer for the moment. Alright Teacher Yen, I'll wait for your call. He Yen picked up the phone, pulled the seat belt and fastened it. Then she turned to Fu Xinqing and said in a cold voice, Fu Xinqing, please don't go crazy and find a place to park first, okay? The car sped west along the main road, exiting the city and turning south onto a dark, secluded road that led to a river. He Yen couldn't comprehend why he had parked there and confronted him. Why did you stop here? Are you planning to kill someone and dispose of their body? He ignored her, suddenly unfastening her seatbelt and pulling her up. Fu Xinqing, what are you doing? She exclaimed in surprise. What do you think I'm doing? He retorted with a sneer. With one hand, he unbuttoned his trousers, and with the other, he began lifting her skirt. He Yen couldn't bear to suffer humiliation once more and raised her hand to strike his face. Fu Xinqing looked at her briefly, and his expression turned fierce. He paid no further attention to her struggles, treating her as prey to be conquered. After a while, Fu Xinqing eased off, leaving He Yen curled up in the front seat. She sneered and said hoarsely, Fu Xinqing, instead of talking it out, you do things by force. Fu Xinqing looked at her silently for a moment without speaking. And he just drove back along the original road. Both of them remained silent throughout the journey. He Yen eventually turned her gaze towards the car window and calmly stated, please find a pharmacy and stop the car. Fu Xinqing continued to drive in silence. He Yen suddenly turned towards him, frustration apparent in her voice. Fu Xinqing, please stop the car. I need to buy emergency contraception. Fu Xinqing glanced at her but remained unperturbed. He calmly replied, it's not necessary. He Yan's eyes widened, and she regarded him incredulously, as if he were some kind of alien. This reaction only solidified Fu Xinqing's newfound determination. A strange excitement welled up inside him as he thought about the possibility of leaving a child in her life, watching her belly grow day by day, and witnessing the birth of their child. He couldn't help but let out a small smile as he said softly, having a child wouldn't be a bad thing. He Yen was infuriated by his words, and a subtle sense of panic began to creep into her heart. She reminded herself to remain calm, direct resistance would only agitate him further. If she wanted to resolve the situation, she needed to choose her words carefully. She showed him her left wrist, which was wrapped in gauze, and said, Fu Xinqing, look at this. You should know how much medication I've had to take this month. Go ask a doctor if it's safe for me to have a child right now. It's simple, really. If we have a child now, what kind of child will it be? Deformed? Mentally handicapped? You've already abused me enough, do you want to subject my child to the same fate? As she spoke, she began to sob. Perhaps out of embarrassment, she covered her mouth with her hand and turned to look out the window. Fu Xinqing's face darkened, and he looked extremely displeased. He remained silent, but after a while, he abruptly got out of the car. Moments later, he returned from a nearby drugstore and tossed a box of emergency contraceptives to He Yen. She took the pill and swallowed it immediately, but it got stuck in her throat, causing discomfort. Fu Xinqing then handed her a bottle of water with the cap removed. She took it and gulped down a few mouthfuls of water to wash down the pill. Fu Xinqing had been watching her silently, and as they reached their destination and he stopped the car, he got out without a word. He walked ahead, and after a few steps, he turned back without speaking. He simply lifted her off the ground. He Yen found his behavior exceptionally strange today. Something seemed off, but she couldn't quite figure out what was bothering him. So she remained silent and allowed him to carry her upstairs. Once Fu Xinqing placed her on the bed, He Yen uttered in a faint voice, "Get out." Fu Xinqing didn't argue, he simply left the bedroom. As he rested under the dark, starry sky, Fu Xinqing slipped into the world of dreams. In this dream, He Yen was at the school, and when he tried to speak to her, she ignored him and walked away with Liang Yuanzi. This made Fu Xinqing seethe with anger. However, he was abruptly awakened by Ah Zhang's voice as he stood beside him, saying, "Here's the medicine box you asked for, Mr. Fu." Fu Xinqing shook off the remnants of the dream, muttering to himself, "What a ridiculous dream." Fu Xinqing entered the bedroom, holding the medicine box in his hands. He glanced at He Yen, who was sitting on the bed, curled up and sobbing. He waited by the door for He Yen to look at him, but she didn't acknowledge his presence. So, he walked towards her and looked down at her. He spoke faintly, lie down, and I'll give you medicine. Yen was taken aback. And she looked at him suspiciously. Her voice trembled as she implored, Fu Xinqing, have some decency and don't touch me anymore. Do you understand? He held up the medicine box in his other hand, motioning to her, it's just medicine. She stared at him with bitterness. Ignoring her protests, he applied the ointment gently and silently. Holding her wrists in his hands, he asked, does it still hurt? Yen, feeling frustrated, sneered, do you really pity me, or is it just your guilt? Fu Xinqing was embarrassed by her comment but suddenly shouted, is Yuanza much better? I've been with you for months, and I consider you important. Can't you see that I'm trying to change? Yan's eyes widened at the mention of change. She angrily kicked him away from her. Fu Xinqing got up, holding his waist in pain. Yan couldn't hold back her tears, burying her face in the pillow and crying. Fu Xinqing felt surprised and tried to console her. She suddenly got up and started punching his chest in frustration. But Fu Xinqing didn't react, and he said, use more strength, Yan, so I'll feel more of your hatred. Yan stopped and began crying again. Fu Xinqing left the bedroom and ordered Jiang, keep an eye on her. No matter what, don't let her leave the house for a few days. The next morning, Yan went downstairs to find Fu Xinqing and shouted, Fu Xinqing, why am I forbidden to go outside? Is there no end to this? While sipping his tea, Fu Xinqing replied faintly, I want to know where the fingerprints you brought to the Chen family have gone. Yan's heart skipped a beat, but she tried to keep her composure as she said, I thought we had reached an agreement in the hospital that day. We can't dwell on the past. Besides, you've destroyed all the original documents. What else are you afraid of? He chuckled and responded, I don't care about it, but I still want to know who is helping the Chen family. It's better to be cautious in the future. Yan had no choice but to answer truthfully, I don't know. Whether you believe it or not, I really don't know. I did steal your fingerprints, but before I could get the results, they were exposed. Fu Xinqing fell silent for a moment, as if he were trying to discern the truth. Finally, he said, then you can only wait patiently for me to find out this person on my own. After a while, Jiang reported to Fu Xinqing, Chen Hegua called a police officer surnamed Zhang and mentioned the matter of fingerprints. He added, Officer Zhang asked Chen Hegua to send the fingerprints to him, so it seems he still has the original fingerprints in his possession. Fu Xinqing gently raised his chin and said in a deep voice, try to get the fingerprints from the girl's hand and prevent them from falling into the policeman's hands. As for the officer, don't take any action, just have someone follow him closely until everything is clear. Jiang hesitated for a moment and asked, what should we do about the Chen family? Shouldn't we send someone to investigate on that front? Fu Xinqing thought for a moment and replied, don't take any action for now, so as not to alert the snake. Later, Fu Xinqing found Yan in the fitness room, where she was running on the treadmill. He leaned against the door and watched her quietly as she ran. When she finally stopped, he asked softly, do you know a policeman named Zhang? Yan wiped her sweat and responded, you don't believe me, do you? What do you want me to say? He gave a faint smile and said, Yan, I want to believe you. Yan raised her eyebrows and replied coldly, very well, I'll answer you. I don't know any police officer named Zhang. I only knew a man named Chen. He's dead now. I don't know if his death is because of me, but I feel guilty. I exposed myself to save his foolish daughter, risking my life to gamble on your little bit of pity for the safety of my parents. He remained silent, gazing at her. I thought I had won that gamble, but in reality, I was just being foolish, she said with self-deprecation. She pushed him away and added, it's still the same. I'm willing to take that gamble. You can do whatever you want. I'll accept it. Just don't involve my parents. That's your responsibility. Keep your word. As she reached the door, she turned to look at him again and smiled, saying, also, don't bother testing me in the future. I truly don't know where Officer Zhang is. I've already repaid the Chen family's favor. Whether the Chens live or die has nothing to do with me. Don't worry, I won't divulge anything. Fu Xinqing watched her, stunned. After a moment, his smile faded, and the shadow in his heart lifted. He followed her out and trailed her to the second floor. When she headed into the bathroom to take a bath, he knocked on the door and asked with a smile, can I help you? After a brief silence from inside the bathroom, she suddenly opened the door and asked him coldly, Fu Xinqing, what are you planning? Haven't I made myself clear enough? Seizing the opportunity, he cupped her face in his hand and said with a low smile, Yan, you're truly remarkable. She was initially taken aback, then furrowed her brows in anger and scolded indignantly, Shenjijia, you're a pervert. He just smiled, unable to contain himself, and lowered his head to kiss her. She eventually relented and accepted his kiss. After a long while, he raised his head and quietly called her, "Ah Yen." Yan's face remained flushed as she buried her head into his neck, her forehead pressed against his broad shoulder. In a soft, almost hesitant voice, she confessed, "Shinjijia, I'm really tired. I don't want to calculate or plan anything. If you love me, I'll be with you. When you no longer love me or grow tired of me, you can send me away, and I won't bother you, okay?" Fu Xinxing held her tenderly, unable to distinguish between truth and falsehood at this moment. He didn't want to bother with distinctions, all he had to do was respond with a simple, "okay." Carrying her as if she were a child, he gently placed her on the bed. As he attempted to get closer, Yan suddenly exclaimed, "Fu Xinxing, if you dare to force me again, I'll kill you." He first chuckled, but then he stopped and looked at her with a hint of seriousness. In a quiet and apologetic tone, he said, "I'm sorry." She hesitated for a moment, realizing that this time he had genuinely apologized. She extended her legs to pull him closer and half-jokingly remarked, "You rascal, using apologies to your advantage. What kind of trick are you playing? I just don't have the right conditions, or I would have teased you." Fu Xinxing couldn't help but laugh. This time, he would take precautions himself, but he still grumbled, "Can we not use precautions in the future? Ah Yen, give me a child." Although her heart was fluttering with excitement, she didn't want to show it on her face. Instead, she raised her body to embrace him, taking the initiative while feigning resistance. She replied, "Well, if you openly marry me, I'll give you a child." He was no longer Shinjijia, the minor figure in the criminal underworld. He was Fu Xinxing, the head of the Fu family. He seemed to understand the weight of the matter, pursed his lips and remained silent for a moment. In the end, he could only respond with a deep kiss. After their passionate night, they both overslept the next morning. Fu Xinxing woke up earlier due to Yan's snoring, but Yan's mobile phone rang loudly, startling her awake. She picked up the phone in a daze and said, "Hello," only to be met with her mother's frantic voice on the other end, "You're spending the spring festival at someone else's house, aren't you? Didn't you say you came home yesterday?" Yan, in a panic, sat up in bed and stammered, "I'm back. I really am back." Fu Xinxing, who had awakened before her, remained silent and chuckled softly, whispering, "Don't make a fuss. I won't make a sound. You can talk freely." On the phone, Yan's mother continued to question, "You're back. When did you come back? Where have you been?" Glancing at the time, Yan fabricated a story, saying, "I got back late yesterday. My flight was delayed, and I arrived in the middle of the night. I had some things to take care of this morning. Mom, wait for me. After I'm done with my work, I'll come over in the afternoon to help you pack." Yan's mother sighed and responded, Yen, if you're really with Fu Xinxing, you shouldn't hide it from your mother. Bring him home so Mom and Dad can meet him." Both Yan and Fu Xinxing were taken aback by the suggestion. Fu Xinxing moved closer to Yan and gazed at her face intently. She met his eyes and, with a determined look, whispered into the phone, "Mom, when you get back, I'll bring him to meet you and Dad, all right?" With that simple promise, Fu Xinxing couldn't help but feel a surge of happiness. He reached out to gently caress her cheek. Yan finished talking to her mother on the phone, and when she hung up, she turned to Fu Xinxing. With a playful grin, she tickled him and said, "Who was all silent just now, huh?" Fu Xinxing looked at her with a teasing smile and whispered, "Ah Yen, say that you like me." She pretended to be annoyed and asked in a hushed tone, "Shinjijia, do you think I'm foolish? Why should I wear the hat first? If you want to hear it, then you say it first." He rolled her over and, in a husky voice, said, "All right, I'll say it. Yen, I like you." She raised her eyebrows slightly and, with a serious expression, replied, "All right, I know."